We are live.
Good evening, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. We are just a few minutes early, but we wanted to open up the webinar. So thanks for joining us, and we will get started here in a few minutes. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Well, good evening, everybody who is joining us tonight. We appreciate you spending your Thursday evening with us as the second meeting we're having with the community on the City of Reno's 2021 redistricting process. I am Callie Wilsey. I am in the City of Reno City Manager's office and managing this project on behalf of the city. I am joined today by our consulting partners, Sarah Seeloff, Ben Maloney, and Kent Martin. We thank them for joining us tonight. We're looking forward to kicking off this phase and tonight's discussion about the draft maps. Those are now online for everybody. If you haven't had a chance to look at them, they have just recently got up, and we are going to walk through not only what is in those maps, but how to provide feedback. But before we dive in, just a few housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar and we'll be posting it to the city's YouTube page as soon as we can. The website URL where we are keeping all of this information is reno.gov/redistricting. That's where the maps are available, the tool to provide feedback, as well as a couple of FAQs that came up from the last meeting. We wanted to make sure we got some information up there for everybody. So that is also available on the website. So again, thanks for joining us, and let's go ahead and dive in. So tonight's presentation, we are just going to quickly review the redistricting process and some of the principles that are very important to guiding this. And then we're diving into those 4 preliminary map scenarios. And then we're going to talk about that feedback tool and how you can provide feedback. And the last portion of tonight will be focused on public comment. This will probably feel and look a little bit different than last meeting. We will absolutely be here if you have any specific questions we can ask, but mostly we want to be listening to your feedback, kind of initial thoughts and reactions if you have those. So we're looking forward to that moment. With that, we will turn it over to Ben, who is going to get us started on the presentation. Ben.
All right. Actually, Sarah, did you want to handle this one?
Okay. And I apologize, Kelly, I was under the impression that the city was going to be, that you were going to be displaying the PowerPoint and advancing the slides for us.
I am. Are you guys not able to see it? I can see it.
I'm sorry. Okay. Yes. Then our presentation up. So let's go ahead and dive in. So just want to orient everyone to reorient everyone to the process for redistricting. This has begun with data collection. We are now presenting to you draft maps and seeking community input, which will be used to produce revisions to these maps, and the maps then will go before the City Council for adoption. So this is a slide that we used. You've seen this before if you attended the last meeting, but just want to remind you where we're at in this process, and community input of the kind that we are preparing you to provide tonight is really critical to this process. So next slide, please. Excellent. So Ben, do you want to speak to Redistricting Foundations really quickly?
Yeah, definitely. So there are a number of considerations we have to keep in mind when we are creating these draft maps and then taking in additional public comment and making revisions. Chief amongst those is that the districts must be population balanced. The charter, the Reno City Charter, allows for a 5% variance away above and below the ideal population, which is roughly 52,000. We'll dive a little bit more into that as we go through the slides. We're also trying to keep the districts contiguous. The process must be done in compliance with all local, state, and federal laws, including the Federal Voting Rights Act. And we're trying to not favor or disfavor a protected class or political party. And at the same time, we have to consider the council member locations when making edits to these districts or wards. We're also trying to keep them as compact as possible, and we're going to touch more and more on that as we go through the slides. But one of the things to keep in mind, just the geography of Reno, keeping things compact is an awful tough solution, but you'll see more about that coming up. We're also trying to preserve communities of interest, and we're also trying to preserve or move these districts along while keeping in mind the existing natural boundaries, be it say mountains, rivers, creeks, or even say highways, rivers, roads, such. Okay, next slide. So communities of interest, this is really the part that we really need to hear more information from the public to start taking into account other things that we just can't pick up on when pulling from a GIS data site or such. So a community of interest is a group of people in the same geographically definable area who share common social and economic interests. So we're interested in shared cultures, characteristics, or bonds that people may have within the broader community. Number two, is the community geographic in nature? Is your community able to be mapped? Also strong things to mention when you are submitting your comments at that site listed below. And then describe your community relationship with the city and how it's affected by policy decisions made by the city council. All things we are very interested in hearing as we move on to the next phase.
Great, next slide, please. Okay, so we will be digging into details of how you can submit feedback. Later in this presentation, we are going to launch now into a description of the 4 preliminary scenarios. And so I just want to highlight that for each of these, you're going to see a map accompanied by some explanatory statistics, including population variance, race and ethnicity breakdown, as well as some compactness measures that Ben was mentioning. All of these maps are drafts to be informed by public feedback. I just want to address really quickly, I saw a question come up asking what is a protected class? So a protected class is any group that is protected under federal, state, or local laws. So protected from discrimination. So for example, sex or gender, race or ethnicity, national origin, creed, religion, these are all examples of protected classes. Next slide, please. Sorry, Kelly, can you, there we go. Okay, thank you. Let's take a look at the current configuration of the city to begin with. So here you can see Reno's 5 wards. The ideal population, which is the census described population of Reno, divided by 5 for the 5 wards, is 52,833. So this is really, in a perfect scenario, a perfect world, which we're never going to inhabit, this is the population that we're trying to get closest to in each of the districts. So you can see that at present, the total deviation across all 5 wards from that ideal population is 20.8%. The Reno City Charter mandates that total deviation be 5% or less. So we have some work to do, and that's what the 2020 census numbers are going to inform. You can see here, broken down by ward, what the actual deviation looks like, both in terms of the sheer number of people, either above or below that ideal population, as well as percentage above or below the ideal population. And so you can see, just something to point out here is that all of the wards, with the exception of Ward 2, are below the ideal population, and Ward 2 is substantially above at almost 14% above that ideal population number. Next slide, please. Excellent, thank you. So here, and I want to stress that all of this information is available on the redistricting engagement portal at reno.gov/redistricting. You'll see that URL several times throughout this presentation. So please do not stress, do not feel compelled to take lots of screenshots. You can find all of this information at the redistricting portal. A couple of things I just want to highlight here that, again, you can see in the blue chart to the left, that we see some of the numbers that we saw on the last slide, but then race and ethnicity to the right, the green chart, shows that we have a no majority minority districts, but some minority populations present in each ward. And I do want to apologize, the software that we have used to generate these tables uses the term district. And so but we are talking about wards. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about some of the compactness measures. So here you will see a number of different compactness measures that have been generated to describe the current configuration of Reno's wards. A couple of things to note here. Number one, there are several, as you can see, there's 5 different kinds. These are all based on specific statistical tests. And if you're interested, there's a lot of information available online about how these measures are developed. What I want to highlight for you is that Polsby-Popper, REOC, convex hull, and length width compactness measures. In these cases, 1 is the closer the number is to 1, the more compact the wards. The closer the number is to 0, the less compact the wards. With the Schwartzberg measures at the right-hand side, far right-hand column, it's the opposite. 1 is the most compact. So the closer you are to 1, the more compact you are. As that number goes up from 1, the less compact you are. So you will see these numbers repeated for each scenario. And again, all of this information is available on the redistricting portal. Next slide, please. And Ben, let's talk about scenario 1.
All right, so we're going to start diving into the different variations that we came up with. We're starting to make some adjustments to get down to the ideal population. So preliminary scenario number 1, after making a few changes primarily to the north end of number 2 and west side of Ward 3, that shifts enough population to where we can get to the total deviation down to 1.3%. You see on the left side of the slide, breakdown of each of the wards if this is preliminary scenario were to be accepted. Say 127 people above in Ward 1 or 0.2% above. Ward 2, a little bit low, but still underneath that 1%, 0.3% above in Ward 3, 0.5% below in Ward 4, and then 0.6% above in Ward 5. So all of these are well below that 5% threshold that we're looking to stay underneath with just a minimal amount of movement. Next slide. So this slide, the next couple slides will detail some of the changes or a more zoomed in view of the changes that took place. So on the left side or the left picture, we see the existing situation and then scenario 1 on the right side. So the big shift here is taking that area from Ward 2, shifting it to Ward 1 on the west side of Virginia. And then on the right side, you see we take that blue chunk of Ward 1 and shift that to Ward 3. And that's where we're starting to pay attention to some of those boundaries that we want to keep so that we can keep some of these wards a little bit more compact where we can make them more compact. Next slide. This is also one of the other shifts that took place where that south side of or southwest side of Ward 3 shifts over to Ward 2, trying to balance some of the population. Was the main consideration, I believe, for this one. And then next one. And then this is a small change. I think if we could zoom out, you can see it's actually a very tiny change, but it does shift the population enough that we do get a more desirable total deviation. I think it went from maybe 1.7, 1.8, something along those lines. And when in the existing situation, after we made those previous changes, and then when pushing through on this change, we drop it down to 1.3%. And I think it does keep the neighborhoods a little bit more consistent. I think it was part of the rationale for this one. And so if we look at the total population and deviation per district, again, you see everything is well below that 5%, all below that 1% also. So there's if we were just looking strictly at population and nothing else, this would probably be a pretty fantastic scenario to move forward. Your total population by race, ethnicity per district, the moves were fairly minimal in size. We're not seeing a big shift of any race or ethnicity from one ward to the next. At most, you're looking at maybe 1 to 3% moving from, say, Ward 2 to Ward 1 or Ward 2 to Ward 3 and such. Next. And let's see, our compactness measures per ward, like Sarah had already mentioned, we are really just comparing these districts amongst themselves. So there's no cutoff number that we're looking really for your everything but the Schwartzberg you want below or between 0 and 1. And then anything above 1 for the Schwartzberg, you're getting further and further away from compactness. These are all going to be kind of strange numbers if you were to compare this to, say, a more box-like municipality, say like Schwartzberg, all well above 1.0. If it were a more box-like municipality, you'd probably see them closer to 1.0, but doesn't really matter how high those numbers are compared to other districts or other municipalities. These are all just comparisons amongst themselves. So you'll be looking at them to see how certain districts compare to other districts or wards within the municipality. So right now, standing out really is Ward 4 on the north side of the city. It's just, there's not much you can really do. It is a result of the shape that it is. So it's just going to be a higher number compared to the rest of them, no matter how many changes you make to it. That's just how it's going to be. Scenario 2, Sarah.
Excellent, thanks, Ben. So scenario 2 has a total deviation of 1.8, so a little higher than scenario 1. You can see here on the left-hand side of this slide where and how the deviations break down. So again, we're looking at numbers that are pretty close to the ideal population, but a little below in Ward 1, a little above in wards 2, 3, and 4, and then a little under ideal population in Ward 5. Looking at this map, you can see that there are a couple of areas where you can see some white hash marks, kind of diagonal lines, and those indicate where changes have taken place. So some of the areas that have been moved in scenario 2 are the same as in scenario 1, and then we have a couple of different changes to discuss as well. So let's dive in. Next slide, please. So this, we've already seen this slide. Again, as Ben mentioned, really trying to use naturally occurring boundaries like a major roadway to keep these districts a little more compact, and moving part of Ward 2 to Ward 1, the blue, and then moving part of Ward 1 to Ward 3 in the yellow. Next slide, please. We've seen this before as well, so also shows up in scenario 1 here, moving part of Ward 3 to Ward 2. Next slide, please. And here is this is a little different. So this is a piece of Ward 1 that has been moved to Ward 2. Again, trying to just really preserve compactness. You can see that there's a roadway here that's running along the new boundary of what would be the proposed Ward 2 in this case. Next slide, please. And here we're looking up at I believe this is an area near the university, and so we can see that a part of Ward 4 in the purple has been moved to Ward 3 in the yellow, and vice versa. So effectively, there's kind of a flip-flop in these two pieces between wards, again, as an attempt to really maintain compactness by moving along some of these major roadways in the area. Next slide, please. Great. So here you can see, again, on the left-hand side, total population and deviation per district. These are numbers that we saw at the very beginning. And again, the race and ethnicity breakdown on the right. As Ben noted, we really don't see huge movements, but in this case, but you can see that there are still minority voters are are present in each ward. And then moving on to the compactness measures. Again, you can see that the looking at the Schwartzberg scores, Ward 4, as Ben mentioned, is a little on the high end. And again, just some of that is just a product of geography and how the ward and how these wards were built, so to speak. Over here in the leftmost 4 columns, right, Polsby Popper through to length width, you can see, remember, these are where anything close to 1 is the most compact. So you can see how these numbers arrange. And, you know, again, just to underscore what Ben said, we're not comparing these numbers, these compactness measures really don't serve to compare from one to the other. So we're not trying to compare Polsby Popper to the convex hull scores. We're really looking within each category to get a sense of how the wards compare relative to one another in terms of their compactness. So Ben, I'm going to pass it back to you to talk about scenarios 3 and 4.
All right, so yeah, preliminary scenarios 3 and 4, you're going to notice on both of these that the total deviation is just a little bit higher, or maybe even double in some cases, but still underneath that 5%. These are, I think, yeah, still perfectly valid maps. We're experimenting a little bit more. Not necessarily bad maps, but there's probably good things in each of these that we could grab and pull into what would be the final map. So again, total deviation 3.7%. Our standout here is Ward 2 at 2.5% above, or 1,300 people more than that 52,000 or nearly 53,000 ideal population. All right. So there's a lot happening. In preliminary scenario number 3, the existing scenario on the left side with the areas highlighted in red are what we changed over, a part of what we changed over for scenario 3. You see a large chunk coming out of the northwest side of Ward 2. Some changes happening to northwest side or west side really of Ward 3. On the top right of the right side under scenario 3. The bottom left, that whole area went from Ward 2 to Ward 1, shifting a large amount of population over to Ward 1, and then a smaller-ish change on the bottom right of the right side there as we moved from Ward 2, or mainly from Ward 1, a little bit from Ward 2, all to Ward 3. And then this we've seen already in the previous scenario. We're just keeping this change consistent with that flip-flop between Ward 3 and Ward 4 over by the college. All right, total population deviation per district. Again, Ward 2 is our big standout with 1,300 above the ideal population. Ward 5, 623 below the total or the ideal population. Total population by race, ethnicity per district. Again, not seeing huge changes here, but we are going to see a few more than we did in the previous scenario. But still, probably not more than maybe 2 to 4%, maybe a tops 5% if we look real close at some of these. But we're not looking at huge shifts, nothing like 10%, 15% or anything along those lines. And then the compactness measures, again, one more time, this is probably just a nice little thing to take a look at. If you were to use I'd probably focus on this once we get to say between 2 maps and we need a tiebreaker between them. Something like this would probably be a good measure to see which wards stand out amongst each other in each of the scenarios. But again, geography is going to be our limiting factor for these. All right, preliminary scenario number 4, total deviation of 3.9%. So just a little bit higher. Ward 2 is still where we're going to see the biggest difference with 1,300 people above that ideal population, or 2.5%. This time, instead of Ward 5 being a little low, it's Ward 1, 702 people fewer, or 1.3% below the ideal population. All right, so existing situation, we made some smaller changes. We've really just built off of preliminary scenario number 3 to build scenario, yeah, I can say this, number 4. So the existing situation there on the left side over by the Sparks Livestock Event Center, we shift over from Ward 3 to Ward 5. And then next slide. In this situation, we are shifting from Ward 1 to Ward 3, trying to balance some of the population in Ward 1, trying to get that up. I think at this point, Ward 1 was looking a little low with some of the other changes we had made. So we started going across Virginia to the east a little bit to grab some from Ward 3, which was a little bit on the high side at the time. And the next one. And this is one of the bigger shifts that we made. Okay, that shifted down on the right side. But I think you can generally get the idea. We're looking at a big shift of population from Ward 5 to Ward 1. They're on the far west side of Ward 1, on the west side of the city. All right. Total population and deviation per ward, we touched on already with Ward 2 as our standout at 1,300 over, and then Ward 1 at 697 on the low side, 1.3%. Total population by race, ethnicity per ward. We're not seeing anything really too different from the previous scenario. Probably merits a closer look in a few of these, but for the most part, we're still not going to see big shifts, huge shifts in percentage-wise of populations, but something to keep an eye on as we're looking at preliminary scenario number 4, maybe taking a deeper dive into how these actual hard numbers are looking. And then finally, our total deviation for scenario number 4. You're not going to see too much different when looking at comparing 3 to 4 in this case, since they were pretty 4 is right, was built off of scenario 3, so no big shifts there. But again, a nice little number to look at if you are coming down to, or a series of numbers to look at if you do need some extra depth or another reason to maybe pick one scenario over another as something to present. All right.
Great. Thank you very much, Ben. So I want to talk a little bit about how to give feedback. I've seen multiple great questions come up in the chat, and I think some of those will actually feed into a discussion of communities of interest, which we mentioned at the beginning, right? These are communities with shared characteristics that are also able to be drawn on a map. We are able to learn about your communities of interest because you can tell us. And the way you can do that is to go to reno.gov/redistricting. This is the one-stop shop for all of your redistricting resources. As you scroll down the page, you will see a variety of information followed by maps of existing wards. And those include kind of one-pagers that provide detailed breakdowns, but total population by race and ethnicity for the wards. Keep going. Right below that, you'll see a number of resources that help explain the 4 preliminary options that we've presented to you tonight. So, and I just want to point out that there are static maps that you'll be able to see. So if you prefer a PDF where you can zoom in and move the map around on your screen, those are all available for each of the preliminary options. And then we also have a dynamic map that allows you to scroll through and observe the existing boundaries with an overlay of the proposed changes under each preliminary option. And those are also accompanied by the summary statistical tables that we've just shown you. So as you are reviewing those maps, I'd like to encourage you to click on the link at that page to provide feedback about the maps. And there's a 2-step process. Number 1 is a survey on these preliminary scenarios where you can rate them, tell us what you like about them, tell us how they could be better. That moves pretty quickly, but there's, as you can see in this screenshot here, we've got text boxes. So we want to hear from you as much detail as you can share about why these are good, how they could be better. Please, this is your opportunity to enter that feedback. Further down on that same page, we get to step 2, which is identifying communities of interest. And you can see a couple of screenshots here. We have a tool that is embedded called the Community Builder. It's embedded in this page. Pretty simple to use. We have a animated explanation of how the tool works, or if you prefer to read, there's also a document that you can access with written instructions. And I want to highlight that all of this, the survey and The instructions for the community builder are available in both English and Spanish. And so with the community builder, you're going to answer a couple of questions about your community of interest. You know, what is it? What are the shared characteristics? And where do we find your community of interest? And then you'll actually be able to draw it on the map. And you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen, the lower image features kind of a blue shape. And this is an example of what a community of interest might look like once you draw it. And so you can submit, it's possible to submit multiple responses to the survey. And we'd like to have your feedback ideally by Monday at 5 p.m. So again, this is, as we talked about in the last meeting, this is a compressed process. And thank you, Callie. That brings us to the timeline. So you can see where we are here in October. There's a lot going on. Callie can talk more about the drop-in session that will exist at City Hall tomorrow. But again, I just want to highlight comments on draft maps and communities of interests are requested by 5 p.m. on Monday, October 11th. That provides time to incorporate changes into some of these preliminary options, at which point we'll be moving toward a final community meeting on October 21st to present final maps, and then on to ordinance adoption. So I believe, Callie, I think it is back over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben and Sarah, for walking us through that. I know it is a lot of information to absorb, particularly sometimes in this virtual setting. So I do want to remind everybody that you can pull up on reno.gov/redistricting all of these maps. You can zoom in kind of close. You can really kind of get detailed around streets and what the changes are looking like. So I do encourage everybody to do that. And we know that it could take a little bit of time to absorb all of this information. But we still want to provide an opportunity tonight to weigh in with initial thoughts, or and we're happy to answer very specific questions. Kind of as I mentioned at the beginning, if it's feedback, we are here to kind of listen to those initial thoughts, write them down so they can be considered as we go through the process. But we also, if there are very specific questions, we are happy to do that. So as we get started in this public comment portion, what I am going to do, the way public comment will work is you will ask you to raise your hand. If you're on Zoom, you can use your webinar controls. We will then bring you in and ask you to unmute yourself. If you're on the phone, you're going to hit *6. And then we will ask you to unmute yourself there. As we are getting people to in that row, I want to kind of run through some of the questions that did come through the chat with the panel. So maybe we can start there. So there was several questions that came in on the chat in relation to kind of other demographic information, age, household income, educational attainment, which we know that those measures are, and information is collected through the census. Sarah or Ben or Kent, could somebody describe how that information is used or should or shouldn't be used in this process?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Ben or Kent, would you like to address that, or would you like me to dive in?
You can go ahead and start, Sarah.
All right. This is communities of interest. I think, Callie, is the answer. That these characteristics, like the ones that you just mentioned about educational attainment, for example, household income, could be a variety of things. I just want to highlight, like, language spoken, shared cultural heritage, or even something like, you know, a shared neighborhood park that serves as a community gathering space. Those are all elements that are reflected in communities of interest, and that's why receiving your input via the Community Builder tool at reno.gov/redistricting is so important, because your communities of interest help bring these variables into the map making process. Kent, anything that you might add to that?
I would just say that the data that we receive through these releases with the census are ones that we're sharing tonight are ones that can be used in the process for redistricting. There are other census data that isn't necessarily used. It's not a part of the process for redistricting. it's good information to have, and certainly the city will use that information in a lot of their policy work moving forward over the next 10 years, but it's not used in redistricting.
Mhm.
The next question that came up was, are the boundaries in the scenarios based on census blocks?
Yes,
And-
they are all based on census blocks, and unfortunately, we can't split them in any way. But so we go with the smallest geographical unit that we can get data for, and then adjust the boundaries based on that.
Let's see, I am scrolling through. Sorry if I missed somebody. So there is a question about the impact of the scheduled ward expansion to 6 wards on thinking in these scenarios. I can maybe take a stab at that. So the city of Reno in the charter is scheduled to go to 6 wards in 2024. Right now, really the guiding principles that the city council adopted in July are really the driving factors around this. And those were kind of the must and would like to haves that we discussed earlier in the presentation. We do know that if by going to 6 wards, it would be substantially different in terms of kind of probably how these wards would be shaped. And so we would have that conversation separately and do some additional public outreach before kind of moving into more substantial changes at that time. The next question came up, the community, thanks, Gordon. I love this. Community builder is cool. That's awesome to see. Is there a staff member who could help neighbors use it? So this kind of also tees up what Sarah was saying on the last slide. One thing we are doing is having a drop-in session tomorrow at City Hall from 2 to 4. So anybody who just wants to have a one-on-one conversation, come look at the maps, maybe up close, or we can show the community builder. We will have that opportunity. The other option is a person could email me at redistricting@reno.gov and would be happy to kind of work with those individuals to try to figure out at how we can support them in providing feedback. And then the next question, I think we captured all of the topics that are coming out here. So let's go ahead and see if anybody has kind of raised their hand and wants to provide some input tonight. Department of IT, do we have anybody in the queue? Sorry, I couldn't see it. Jill, hi, how are you?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
Happy to have you.
I come up with one big concern in all this.
Okay.
I live in Steamboat Estates, which is far south Reno, right up against Pleasant Valley, and we're outside the boundaries of all these maps. What's up with that?
So Jill, without kind of knowing specifically where you live, if you're not within the boundaries of the city of Reno, that likely means you are a county unincorporated resident, and they are going through this very same process that we are right now. And they have, I think, 5 options posted on their website at the moment for public feedback.
Great, thank you.
Welcome. All right, IT, who else is in the queue?
Am I there?
Hi, Donna, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
Good, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'd like to say this is a very tight, well done presentation. I'd like to, kudos to the people who are working on this. And I missed maybe the first 5 minutes of this, so maybe some of the meat. But in this presentation, I'm sure you're going to do it again. You're talking about moving a bunch of Ward 2 to Ward 1. it would be super helpful if you would put a street name somewhere. Is that McCarran or is that Moana or where is that boundary? Because it's kind of hard to tell while you're talking. So just to say that, and then there's a lot of tables and references. Obviously, there's a lot of statistics that went into this. And I have some understanding of statistics, so it wasn't kind of spinning my head too much, but I can see that it maybe is a little complex for most people to kind of get what you're saying with those tables. And so I'm not sure they really add a lot to the general knowledge, because it seems to me, this is my question, my impression is that really you're pushing boundaries on the basis of census block boundaries here and there and the other to achieve a more uniform population, because ultimately you cannot compact a linear zone anyway. So you're not going to ever get those compactness numbers that you're looking for, the zeros and ones. It's just, you can't do it with the geography. But with moving Ward 1 and Ward 2, or taking a little bit of Ward 1 and Ward 3, or however those boundaries move, is that a correct statement or not? I mean, I'm hearing all this talk about everything else and all these other items about population breakdown by race and ethnicity, but I'm not seeing that that's actually part of the process. Are you just shuffling population, or am I mistaken? That's an actual question.
Yeah, no, great question, Donna. Thank you. Sarah or Ben, could you guys talk about how we balance those different components? I think Donna is correct. I mean, she's definitely seeing how important the population balance component of this conversation is, and how those other factors, you know, are balanced in this process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kelly, I'm going to ask Ben to comment on this, because Donna, he can also address your comment about streets and viewing streets. One thing that I would just highlight is that, and Donna, you may have not been able to see this at the beginning, but we did in the beginning talk about the ideal population and where that comes from, and the idea that the ideal population is, you know, basically Reno in the 2020 census divided by 5,
Yeah.
and then
No, I heard that.
okay,
Yeah.
great. Excellent. Ben, can you dive in and address Donna's questions?
Yeah, I could speak to it a little bit. For the most part, when crafting these maps, at least my focus was on the scenarios was looking at total population, with probably race and ethnicity coming in as a second place to that, primarily because I might be just a little paranoid about starting to consider race and ethnicity. You start getting into some maybe potentially ambiguous, dangerous territory with that, but that I think is where we can start taking in some additional information from communities as the communities of interest, and get some additional detail there, and then start developing our revamped scenarios around comment there. As far as the streets, that is not something I'm seeing as an option right now on there, but that is something that we can add, so we can get that taken care of, and people can get some better geographic markers as to where things are happening and changing in each of the scenarios.
Great. And I would just oh, I'm sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
No, so I was just going to chime in. There are on the static maps that you can download on the website, as there are street listings on there, which are really helpful. And when you start to use the interactive tool, it kind of zeroes in on those as well. But we can definitely look and see how we can improve those.
So within it, am I understanding this wrap up to mean that, yes, this is basically shuffling population on the basis of census block boundaries as the primary thing that's happening here? Is that correct?
Sarah, so Donna, the way I would answer that is, it is one of the most primary functions of redistricting, because that is at the core of the requirements around it. So yes.
Yeah, Donna, I would add to that that race and ethnicity have been studied, and the law here governs how race and ethnicity enters the redistricting process. So I think there are multiple layers to this process, right? We start off looking at the census data and the census blocks. We also study the race and ethnicity data. And you can see on reno.gov/redistricting, there are some frequently asked questions that have been posted that help explain how race and ethnicity enter into this process. And then another layer are those communities of interest, which help really refine things a little bit more and articulate exactly where certain communities are, so that they can be ideally kept together. That's not a requirement, but it's one of the shoulds within the process.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Donna.
Question. Thank you.
IT, who is next in the queue?
Hello, this is Jeff.
Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I'm fine. My question is more basic. It seems to me that maps 1 and 2 are slight differences. Maps 3 and 4 are slight differences, but those two sets are a bit different. So it looks like you took map 1 and tweaked a little bit for map 2. You took map 3 and tweaked a little bit for map 4. Am I understanding that correct?
Yes, especially for scenarios 3 and 4. 4 was built directly off of changes that happened in scenario 3. I think if you were to group them together, 1 and 2 are similar. 3 and 4, of course, like I just said, are similar. With 3 and 4, we're trying to head in a slightly different direction than what we were thinking for scenarios 1 and 2. So you're not wrong. They are similar to one another.
It also, to me, it also seemed that the deviation, well, yes, they're all under 5%. There's a significant difference between the deviations in 3 and 4 and the deviations in 1 and 2. Am I correct in that as well?
Yep, you are correct.
Okay, that's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. IT, who is next? Hi, Noe, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Can you hear me?
We can. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. For those that are listening, I just want to say that Callie is very receptive and responsive. So if you do have questions, please reach out to her. My question, I got a couple. Hopefully I can get through all of them within the 2 minutes that I'm allotted. One thing, it's more of a comment actually first, and I know that there's terms that we're using because that's the way that, it's provided in there. And like that whole or that, I can't even remember what it was, but the other one with the compactness, I feel that in talking to the community, it might be easier to just simplify it by saying, compact. I know that that's the term that's being used, but if we would be able to simplify it so that we can all have that general knowledge of what we're talking about, that would be super helpful. In terms of the question that I have, because the maps were available today, and the condensed timeline that we have, I know it may not be possible, but if we're looking at 4 different options and the community still trying to grasp their head around, what everything looks like and all the different concepts, is the 11th really enough time for the community to be able to have enough time to really digest all this information and to be able to provide some meaningful feedback? I guess and so I guess the question would be, is it possible to get to extend that the 11th to another date?
Hey, Noe, thank you so much for your comments. One, on your feedback, appreciate that. And we're actually trying to figure out, to your point on the deadline, if we can extend it a little bit. We're trying to figure out what that date could be. So we are right now encouraging everybody to kind of work towards that, but we can definitely keep everybody in the loop if we can. Certainly, the earlier we can get the feedback, that gives us an opportunity to follow up with folks if there's something that we don't understand or we're trying to learn a little bit more about. So the sooner the better, just given the condensed time frame to finish it overall. But we definitely appreciate that thought process that you raised in terms of the upcoming Monday.
Yeah, thank you. And then just in terms of the conversations you and I have had with potentially seeing if we can get a community meeting, if it were to be after the 11th, I would assume and I would imagine that we would be able to still submit the community feedback to you all. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be correct. And that is playing into the conversation.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question that I have is, would it be possible to get these 4 different options in a shape file or a GeoJSON file? I know that's very, very specific, but if it be possible, I think that could definitely help me and the partners that we're working with so that we can try to get the feedback as quick as possible if we were to have it in one of those 2 formats.
Ben or Sarah, I'm going to ask you because I don't even know what those formats are.
I don't know either. That's just what my data manager keeps telling me to say.
No, that's fantastic. Yes, yeah, everything practically all of this revolves around shape files anyway. So if there's a way to get them to you, we will get them to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, Callie.
Thank you. IT, who is next? Hi, Judy. How are you? Judy, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm
Hi,
here.
how are you?
I'm fine. I just have a question, and maybe this was answered before, but why are we going to wait till 2024 to redo this whole thing into 6 wards? I mean, why are we spending money now to do this when in a couple years we're going to go through the whole process again?
Sure, Judy, thank you for that question. So the Reno City Charter, which is adopted by the legislator and which kind of guides the city operations legally, says that we will review our ward boundaries the year following the census. And then we are in 5 wards until December 31st of 2023. The 6th ward goes into effect January 1st of 2024. So that is why we would be doing it twice.
Wow. Okay.
Thank you for the question, though. And it's come up a lot. IT, the next person. Good evening. Is it?
It's Jazz.
Jazz. Hi, how are you?
Hello, good evening, everyone. First, I wanted to thank you for your work, Harley, and everyone who's put this together. Secondly, I wanted to note and urge the city against redlining, where for those who do not know, it's putting a certain community in one district. It has systemic implications, which is why community input, especially from Ward 3, is so crucial. And that's why I think that a lot of us would like a larger timeline, but wanted to put in my hat in the ring for that as well.
Thank you very much for that feedback. Appreciate it. Donna, you're back.
I'm always back. So, okay, now this is about process. I saw your schedule, your timeline, blah, 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 and then it ends up in front of council with the final map and an ordinance adoption. My question about process is, for one thing, as these other folks have just said, I think this is a difficult thing for people to get their head around, generally in the public, and this timeline, like, oh, but I have a lot to say, but to say it by Monday, I don't know, because I have a lot of other things I'm supposed to say by Monday, and it's very short, and I think the public process should be maybe extended a little bit, and possibly even simplified. Tomorrow would be great, except a lot of people aren't going to be able to go, like me. So I'm just wondering about the process. So you go through these iterations. We're presenting the preliminary. You got general data last time or information. Then this is your preliminary thought process, 1, 2, 3, and 4. You're going to wait till you hear from people on the computer about their communities and then give it some more thought and maybe tweak boundaries a little bit. But a couple of things about that, it's inherently discriminatory because you have to have a computer to play ball, for one thing. Okay, I can go online, that's fine. I live in a neighborhood full of a lot of people who were here when the city was being built, and built their houses in the 50s, and they don't want to have anything to do with computers, and you lose a whole segment of society that way. There's just no input from those people or from underserved people who haven't got computers, who might be interested but don't even know. And I think this is so important that perhaps, you know, flyers at Virginia Lake Park where lots of people go and all the old people in my neighborhood walk and they don't use computers, but they'd see a flyer and know that maybe they should be interested. I just think that that input is really valuable, and you're missing it completely. And if it's just shifting population around to make things geographically compact and make the numbers balanced, then it's a statistics game and none of this really matters anyway. But if the other perceptions are actually important, I think, as previous speakers have mentioned, a little more time is required because somebody who here tonight or at the last meeting needs to go start talking to their neighbors and get this out there a little bit, and you can't do that in 3 days and get some good input. So I'm wondering who's making the decision when the presentation of the, you're going through this iterative process, you're going to then take a final map to council and there'll be an ordinance introduced. So who is actually the body that decides that these are the final maps we will write an ordinance about?
Thanks, Donna. So thank you for your feedback on the timing. Like I mentioned, that we will continue to have those conversations and let everybody know on that component. Ultimately, the city council has the authority to make the decisions on what the final maps are. They have the authority in the charter to make the decision. But what we are doing is taking all of the feedback and bringing forward those options to council to have that conversation at that point as well. So that is the process that is laid out.
They will also see that they will see it along the way. I mean, in other words, they'll see this for number 1 and number 4. It's not like somewhere they're just going to see what the final showed up to be.
That is correct. They are aware that these maps are out there as well as just like the public is right now.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome. IT, who's the next person?
No more people.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank everybody for joining us and the comments and questions that we received at the end today. Please jump on reno.gov/redistricting tonight, check it out. And if you have any follow-up questions, either swing by tomorrow at City Hall between 2 and 4. We will be there to answer questions, or you can email me at redistricting@reno.gov. We really appreciate everybody's time tonight, and thank you so much for your involvement with the city. Have a great one.